Thank you, Madam Chairman. Appreciate the chance to hear from you, Dr. Califf, and we had the chance to discuss some of these things when we were together in my office, and I'd like to raise them again, in part so they're on the record, but in part also to elaborate on them. One is with regards to clinical trials. There is a perspective that drugs that are approved the clinical trials are paid for by the industry, by the drug companies themselves, and that the government itself doesn't have the occasion to develop its own clinical trials and to promote the evaluation of a product which the government may think is of interest, but there's no company that's interested in pursuing it. Does the federal government fund clinical trials at all? And number two, should we do more of that? And if so, how?
Well, first of all, thank you, and I enjoyed our discussion. I hope the government will continue to do what it's done, is to fund clinical trials. I, over time, have been one of the highest funded NIH investigators doing independent clinical trials when I was in academia. As we discussed, the industry does fund its own clinical trials for its own purposes, but there are many issues of public health, essential public health importance, where only the government can fairly ask the question. And your institutions in Utah have been key contributors to those clinical trials that have been done. I would like to see more government-funded trials so that we ask the unbiased questions about which therapies are the best for which people. And lastly, I'll mention PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which Congress graciously just refunded for 10 years, is created just to do that particular part on behalf of patients. You know, as a doctor, the most common question I got is, which treatment is best for me? And that takes comparative clinical trials that the government is very well suited to do.
Thank you. I don't happen to be a believer in this horse deworming product known as ivermectin, but it is my recollection that that is something which is actually going through clinical trials funded by the government, not by the industry. Is that correct?
That's correct. The NIH is funding two large trials right now, one of which using a network which I helped create with the NIH and this Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. So I think we all see treatments, and I made the point in my opening statement, most of what we develop, no matter how good the science looks, turns out to have risks that supersede the benefit. Only 10% of drugs that make it into human clinical trials actually make it to market because of this problem. So we got to have an open mind, we got to do the trials, and then we have to follow the science, follow the data.
Thank you. I was made aware of a practice that perhaps you could elaborate on, which is that a product may be approved for usage by a physician, but limited in when it can be used or how it can be used. And I'm thinking with regards to monoclonal antibodies. It was related that an individual in a hospital with advanced COVID had been in the hospital for several days, wanted to get a monoclonal antibody treatment, but was told, you can't get that, we won't allow you to have that in the hospital. The FDA doesn't allow us to treat you with monoclonal antibodies, even though at the beginning of the disease, they would have been potentially effective. Later on, we don't think they are, so we won't treat you. That seems to be an awfully unfair way to deal with someone who's in a life-threatening circumstance. Is that the correct practice? Is that a correct understanding, rather, of that practice? And does it make sense? And if so, why?
Well, I'll try to be brief in the answer here. But first of all, let me just say, I followed this closely because we knew monoclonal antibodies were highly likely to be effective against SARS-CoV-2 because they worked for the first SARS epidemic, which fortunately was stopped early and never became a global pandemic. As these drugs were developed, it's an amazing effect, a 90% reduction in death and hospitalization, but most effective if used early, and that really should be the focus, and I think that's the basis for which the practices that you described may have evolved. Barely effective, if at all, in people who go, as you know, you get sick with the virus, and then a week or 10 days later, you may get sick enough to enter the hospital. By that point, there's much less effect. Now, the specific practice of preventing prescription of antibodies, I'm not aware that that's happening, but it may be, and I think that would need to be looked at in context. There are some people who don't develop an antibody response where the treatment may be effective.
Thank you. I've got more questions, but my time is up, Madam Chairman. Thank you.